The cameras freeze on a single, unbelievable image. Lauren Boebert rising from her seat, hands clasped, eyes steady, a quiet tremor of sincerity in her voice. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sits poised, expression unreadable, as the first ripple of applause breaks the silence. Then another. Then the whole studio stands. The sound builds like thunder. Disbelief, relief, release. Reporters glance at each other, wondering if they're witnessing history or a well-timed illusion. Phones flash. Hashtags ignite. No one expected this. Not after the hearings, the headlines, the firestorm of insults that turned policy into performance. Yet here it was, grace unscripted, the kind that makes cynics uncomfortable. Boebert's words hang in the air. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett, for bridging divides. The crowd surges again, louder this time, as if the country itself had been holding its breath. For one suspended heartbeat, anger didn't trend, unity did. Somewhere online, a tweet goes viral. Wait, did Boebert just thank Jasmine Crockett? In that single standing ovation, decades of division seemed to flicker, uncertain of their power. But how did two women who once stood on opposite sides of America end up here? In applause, not outrage. Months before that standing ovation, their names were never spoken in the same breath without a spark. In Congress, Lauren Boebert and Jasmine Crockett had become shorthand for two Americas, one armed with fury, the other armored with grace. Clips of their clashes lit up every corner of the internet. Boebert's voice sharp, cutting through hearings like a blade. Crockett's calm responses slicing back with precision born of restraint. It wasn't just politics, it was theater, streamed, shared, memed. To their followers, each exchange was proof of righteousness. To their critics, evidence of chaos. Cameras loved the contrast. Red versus blue. Fire versus composure. One woman fueled by defiance, the other grounded in purpose. It was spectacle dressed as governance, and America, battle-weary, yet addicted to outrage, couldn't look away. Every encounter between them felt like the nation's tension condensed into a single frame. Commentators called it the face-off of the decade. Social feeds exploded after every hearing. Crockett schools Boebert again. Boebert doesn't back down. Neither side surrendered because surrender didn't trend. Yet beneath the noise, something quieter was forming, a fatigue that even fury couldn't mask. Behind the rehearsed sound bites and viral moments, both women had begun to feel the cost of the performance. The endless conflict had turned governance into a stage play where no one ever won. Then came a closed-door committee meeting. No cameras, no audience, just two lawmakers forced to sit across from each other while staffers shuffled papers in uneasy silence. For the first time, they spoke without microphones, without applause, without the safety of their tribes. What began as procedural turned unexpectedly personal. Jasmine said something, not loud, not rehearsed, but real. Something that slipped past Boebert's armor and struck the part of her that remembered what it was to serve, not perform. Outside that room, the world still saw enemies. Inside, a conversation was rewriting the script. America had grown addicted to conflict until one unexpected conversation shifted everything. What Jasmine said behind closed doors didn't just change Boebert's tone, it changed the entire room. Lauren Boebert built her career like a storm, loud, fast, unapologetic. From a small-town diner she once owned to the marble halls of Congress, her rise was forged in defiance. Every headline that called her reckless only fed the legend. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to shake the room. Cameras followed her every step, drawn to the spark of unpredictability she carried like a weapon. When she spoke, it wasn't policy that echoed. It was conviction, raw and unfiltered. To her supporters, that made her a patriot. To her critics, a provocateur. But for Lauren, the distinction didn't matter. What mattered was survival in a system she believed thrived on noise. The moment you went quiet, you went invisible. And for her, invisibility was death. The media montage played like a looping battlefield reel. Late-night hosts mimicking her fiery gestures. Viral clips of heated committee exchanges. Commentators dissecting every smirk, every jab. Even her mistakes, the ones that should have humbled her, only seemed to fuel her brand. She was the embodiment of defiance, a symbol for a movement that felt unheard. Her followers didn't just watch her. They lived through her, cheering as she turned every confrontation into a declaration of identity. But between the applause and outrage, there were quieter moments, the kind no one saw. The pause before camera lights switched on. The sigh after another long day of fighting faces instead of fixing problems. The whispered thought that maybe, somewhere along the way, she'd stop speaking for people and started performing at them. Still, she couldn't stop. The machine of fame didn't reward reflection, it punished it. Every time she softened her tone, headlines called it weakness. Every time she paused, her name slipped 1 inch further down the trending list. So she kept fighting, even when she no longer knew what the fight was for. Her defiance became armor. Her anger became oxygen. To back down was to disappear. That thought followed her everywhere. Through the interviews, the fundraisers, the moments when sincerity tried to break through rehearsed defiance. Her public image had become a fortress, but inside it, the silence grew louder. The friends who once surrounded her now spoke in cautious tones, measuring every word. The isolation was invisible but heavy, like applause that never stopped echoing, even after the stage lights dimmed. She started to notice small cracks in her certainty. The exhaustion that came from having to win every exchange. The ache in her voice after another fiery speech that changed nothing. And the haunting question that lingered when the cameras went dark. Who am I when no one is watching? There were nights when she replayed those viral moments, the ones that made her famous, and felt a strange mix of pride and regret. Pride for standing her ground. Regret for how small the victories suddenly seemed. Politics had become performance art, and she was both actor and audience, trapped in a show that never ended. She told herself it was all worth it, that every controversy kept her relevant, every clash kept her strong. But even warriors get tired of war. And somewhere deep down, a question she'd buried began to rise. What if strength isn't about shouting louder? So when she met Jasmine Crockett again, the woman she once saw only as an adversary, something was different. Not in words, but in eyes. The familiar fire in Boebert's gaze flickered, replaced by something quieter. Recognition. Fatigue, maybe even respect. The cameras hadn't started rolling yet, but the shift had already begun. The warrior was still standing, but for the first time, she didn't look ready to fight. Before the bright lights and viral moments, Jasmine Crockett's story began in quieter rooms. Courtrooms where justice wasn't a headline, it was a daily fight. She learned to stand firm there, not by shouting, but by knowing when silence spoke louder. Her voice, calm and deliberate, carried the weight of every client who couldn't afford to be heard. Justice wasn't theory to her, it was survival. When she stepped into Congress, she carried that same courtroom composure with her. The discipline of a woman who had seen systems fail and still believed in fixing them. The chamber was louder, crueler, and more performative than any trial she'd ever argued, but Jasmine refused to adapt to its chaos. She had a different kind of power, one that didn't need to overpower others to be seen. Cameras often caught her in those viral hearings. The lone figure sitting still while voices around her rose to a fever pitch. Others mistook her restraint for passivity, but Jasmine knew better. Every pause, every measured glance was precision. She wasn't absorbing the noise. She was studying it, preparing to turn it back with the quiet sharpness of truth. Calm wasn't weakness, the narrator murmurs. It was strategy. When critics sneered or colleagues dismissed her, she didn't flinch. She understood something most forgot. You don't fight fire with fire, you fight it with light. And that light, steady and unyielding, became her signature. It was the calm after the storm that made people listen. Her strength came from somewhere deeper than politics, from long nights working pro bono cases, from growing up where every win required twice the effort, from knowing how it feels to be underestimated and refusing to shrink. Her dignity wasn't performative, it was protective. In a room that thrived on chaos, her composure became rebellion. Every hearing tested her patience. Every insult tested her grace. But each time she rose above, something subtle shifted. Her calm didn't just silence her opponents, it exposed them. The louder they yelled, the smaller they seemed next to her quiet certainty. And people noticed, not just those watching from the gallery, but those at home, young women, first-generation professionals, people who had been told to tone themselves down. Jasmine became their mirror, proof that you didn't have to mimic arrogance to be powerful. She wasn't just surviving politics, she was rewriting its rhythm. For her, every confrontation was a chance to restore the tone of leadership, to remind America what composure under fire looks like. She embodied a truth that didn't need to shout to be heard, a truth that would, in time, melt even the hardest defiance. And that moment was coming faster than anyone expected, because the light she carried, the one born of empathy and conviction, was about to pierce even the harshest spotlight. Their last clash had played out like a national spectacle, two women on opposite ends of the spectrum, locked in a verbal storm that every network replayed on loop. The committee room buzzed with cameras and murmurs as Lauren Boebert leaned forward, voice sharp and fast, interrupting before Jasmine Crockett could finish a sentence. The tension was palpable, the kind that made even seasoned aides glance up from their notes. "Answer the question, Congresswoman," Boebert snapped, each word clipped with impatience. Crockett didn't move. She blinked once, let the noise hang in the air, then spoke softly, a deliberate calm slicing through the chaos. "I will, when you finish asking it." The room stilled. That line, simple and measured, cut cleaner than any insult could. A few chuckles rippled across the chamber. The camera panned to Boebert's face, her confidence faltering for the briefest second. Crockett continued, unshaken, every word steady, her tone untouched by the swirl of emotion around her. By nightfall, the clip was everywhere. Commentators labeled it the calm clapback. Edits flooded social feeds, slow-motion replays, subtitles, reaction emojis. Hashtags trended. The internet called it a takedown, but Crockett never smiled. She wasn't there to humiliate. She was there to elevate. Behind the viral moment, something deeper lingered. Boebert, watching the replay later, felt the sting of restraint. Not humiliation, but recognition. She saw in Crockett's silence a discipline she couldn't summon. For the first time, she wondered what it felt like to lead without shouting. For Crockett, it was just another day of surviving a system that confused volume for value. She went home, took off her heels, and didn't think twice about the clip. But to the country watching, that single moment had drawn a line. A study in contrast between composure and chaos, between control and collapse. That exchange became legend, the kind replayed before every new hearing. It was the face-off people cited whenever politics felt beyond repair, proof that grace could still hold its ground. And months later, that memory would echo when the two faced each other again. The studio lights blazed like interrogation lamps, cameras poised to capture another viral clash. The producers had sold it as a spirited debate, but everyone knew what they were hoping for: fireworks. On one side sat Lauren Boebert, chin high, ready to defend every word that had made her both a symbol and a target. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, her hands folded lightly in her lap. Between them stretched an invisible fault line that mirrored the one cutting through the country itself. The moderator barely finished the first question before Boebert launched forward, her tone tight and rehearsed. "I want to apologize for standing up for what I believe," she said, the edge of old battles lacing every syllable. "People are tired of politicians who play nice while the country falls apart. I fight because I care." Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even shift in her seat. She simply listened, the kind of listening that makes noise feel smaller. Boebert's voice grew louder, almost offensive. "You call it division, I call it passion. And I'm not about to be lectured by someone who thinks calm means you care more." The audience stirred, sensing the tension they'd come for. The moderator tried to step in, but Crockett raised a hand, gently, firmly. When she finally spoke, her voice landed with the weight of still water. "Lauren," she said, her tone neither sharp nor soft, just human. I don't need you to agree with me. I just need you to know I see you. We both love this country. We just dream it differently. Silence, the kind of silence that bends time. Even the hum of studio equipment seemed to pause. Boebert's expression faltered, confusion flickering first, then reflection. Something about the words disarmed her, peeled back the armor she'd worn for years. You could almost see it, the calculation behind her eyes giving way to something unpracticed, vulnerability. The audience exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath. A man in the front row nodded slowly. The moderator, unsure whether to interject or let the moment breathe, stayed quiet. Boebert blinked, the practiced defiance gone. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, stripped of the performance that usually carried it. You know, she said, I used to think compromise was weakness. That if you weren't shouting, you weren't fighting hard enough. Crockett's gaze stayed steady. Not triumphant, not pitying, just open. Boebert inhaled, a small, trembling breath that betrayed the weight behind her next words. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett, for bridging divides, for reminding us what leadership looks like. And then, she stood. For a split second, no one moved. Then a ripple of applause broke across the studio, hesitant at first, then swelling into a full standing ovation. The sound filled every corner of the room, echoing off the walls, rising like a wave that refused to break. Crockett didn't bow, didn't gesture. She simply nodded, her eyes soft but resolute. Boebert glanced at her again, and this time there was a faint, reluctant smile, not of defeat, but release. The camera zoomed out, capturing what no script could stage. Two women framed by opposing ideals, now sharing a moment of grace, so rare it felt almost mythical. The narrator's voice broke through the applause, low and reverent. For one brief, electric moment, the walls of division trembled. Social media would soon explode, pundits would debate sincerity, and cynics would search for hidden motives. But inside that studio, before the noise returned, something honest had happened, something unrepeatable. Indeed, as the lights dimmed and producers whispered into headsets, no one yet knew the full weight of what they'd witnessed. But what happened after that applause stunned even the producers. Phones lit up across the country before the studio lights had even cooled. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Lauren Boebert, standing and applauding Jasmine Crockett. The caption that traveled fastest said it all. Did Lauren Boebert just thank Jasmine Crockett? Hashtag Boebert applauds Crockett trended worldwide before sunrise. TikTok split it into reaction edits, side-by-side duets of viewers gasping, crying, and whispering, "This can't be real." On X, Twitter, the video crossed 1 million views in under an hour. Some called it the most shocking act of civility ever broadcast on cable news. Others refused to believe it wasn't staged. Cable networks broke from scheduled programming. CNN aired slow-motion replays like a sports highlight. Fox News anchors sat stunned, half smiling, half skeptical. Late-night hosts replayed the moment to laughter, but the laughter softened into applause. You know something's changing, one joked, when Lauren Boebert becomes the face of grace. Even for 10 seconds. Commentators dissected every detail. The timing of Boebert's smile, the tilt of Crockett's head, the exact second the audience rose to its feet. Psychologists were invited to discuss empathy fatigue. Pastors called it a modern parable. Hashtag spawned submovements. Hashtag grace goes viral. Hashtag composure is power. Hashtag see each other. But the most surprising voices weren't the pundits. They were the ordinary Americans posting shaky, emotional videos from kitchens and car dashboards. I don't care what side you're on, one woman said, tears in her voice. That moment gave me hope. For the first time in years, another wrote, I replayed a political clip, not out of outrage, but out of peace. Brands chimed in with tone-deaf memes. Politicians tried to co-opt the energy. But for a rare 24 hours, the internet wasn't built on anger. It was built on awe. As one journalist put it, America's most divisive congresswoman stood for her opponent. and somehow the country sat still long enough to feel it. Yet beneath the trending hashtags, doubts simmered. Comment sections filled with skepticism. Was it genuine? A PR stunt? Cable roundtables framed it as a political pivot. Others called it an emotional awakening. But to those who had seen Boebert's eyes, not the words, but the look, something had undeniably shifted. And then came the morning after. Crockett was invited on Good Morning America, The View, and even a conservative podcast that once mocked her. Viewers expected celebration or self-congratulation. But when she finally spoke, calm, measured, eyes steady on the camera, she didn't bask in victory. She issued a challenge. If one moment of listening can change how we see each other, she said, imagine what one day of compassion could do. The applause had gone viral. But what Jasmine said next turned applause into action. Jasmine sat in the quiet after the storm. The studio empty, applause long faded into the hum of distant stage lights. Her phone buzzed endlessly, messages flooding in from friends, reporters, strangers. But she didn't reach for it. She just breathed. In that silence, she realized something simple, something most had forgotten. It's not about being right, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. It's about being real enough to listen. The clip would later circulate again, that line stitched on a highlight reels and over piano music. But in that moment, there was no performance, just truth. The narrator's voice returned, low, reflective, like the calm after rain. Maybe America doesn't need louder leaders, just braver listeners. For years, politics had been a theater of outrage, each side rehearsing their anger, waiting for applause instead of understanding. But here, in one fragile, fleeting exchange, something broke the pattern. Two women who once symbolized everything that divided a nation had, for 1 second, symbolized what could still unite it. This wasn't about party lines or viral clips. It was about us, about what we choose to elevate, what we choose to echo. Every share, every retweet, every replay was a quiet vote for the kind of world people wanted to believe in again. Images flashed, not of debate stages or headlines, but of everyday moments. A father turning down the volume to listen to his daughter. Two neighbors talking again after years of silence. Students replaying the clip in classrooms, teachers asking, "What do you hear in her tone?" The music swelled, slow strings, then a soft brass note rising beneath the words. In a world of shouting, the narrator continued, the loudest revolution is respect. It wasn't a surrender. It was strength, the kind that doesn't need to dominate, only to dignify. And in that quiet dignity, something remarkable happened. The noise began to feel small. The screen faded to Jasmine and Lauren, captured mid-laughter after the broadcast. No mics, no lights, just two people who'd found, for once, the same frequency. A single heartbeat of stillness. Then, the final voiceover, gentle, resonant, unhurried. Because sometimes the greatest mic drop is a handshake. If you believe leadership begins with listening, share this moment. Subscribe and stand with the movement proving that calm isn't weakness, it's strength. Because when courage meets empathy, even the loudest walls can fall silent. And maybe that's the America worth applauding. The screen fades to black as the echoes of the studio applause blend with a soft orchestral chord. Not triumphant, but hopeful. On-screen text appears, simple and bold. Composure is power. Respect is revolution. A pause, then the faint sound of renewed applause, carrying the message beyond the frame.